Evening, everyone. As you can see, Rory Kinnaird has got a lovely new haircut, a lovely beard trim, and I'm looking pretty fresh, if I may say so myself. Now, we're back again for another reason why Jesus came to die. And tonight we're looking at Jesus came to die to bring an end to the Old Testament priesthood and become the eternal high priest. Now, we've been looking a bit about priests and temples and sacrifices. That's what we've done with our Exodus series, and also the last couple of videos have been about that as well. And if you remember, the priest's job is essentially to be like a go-between between Israel, God's people, and God. He's the person that has access to God, who can go in to see God and talk on their behalf. And the way that he does that, the way that he can give access to the people for God and be that mediator is through sacrifices. Now, the problem is there's a few problems with this priesthood. And here's a few of them. One is that these priests are mortal. In other words, they die. And they can't continue being that priest forever. So when one dies, then you need another one to replace them, as you do. Not only that, but they only offered animal sacrifices. So it was, whether it was a bull or a goat or a lamb or something that they were cutting the throat off, it was only an animal still. And the problem with an animal, as they sacrifice them year after year after year, is that they can't really, truly bear the guilt and bear the sin of humanity. So they're mortal, they sacrifice animals, and they're also sinful. So if you go to the sacrificial system, the high priest has to make a sacrifice first before he can make a sacrifice for everyone else. And that sacrifice is for himself because he's sinful. So he's got to sacrifice for his own sins with an animal that can't actually bear the guilt for himself before he can then go and sacrifice for everyone else. And so year after year after year after year after year, and sacrifice after sacrifice after sacrifice, it continues and continues. And it's never going to fully give access and fully give forgiveness to humanity. But really, all this is doing, as many of the things that we've talked about, is that this is pointing to something greater. This is pointing to a time when God's going to send someone who is totally qualified to be our high priest, to put away sin once for all. In other words, I mean, that 3 words, once for all, is so good in the Bible because it means that it will be achieved completely, final. It won't need to be done again. And guess who that person is, who that qualified person is? Yes, ladies and gentlemen, you guessed it. It's the Lord Jesus Christ. And this is why he's totally qualified. Number 1 reason why he's qualified to be the final priest and the final sacrifice is that he was sinless. He was sinless. So check out Hebrews chapter 7, verse 27. Unlike the other high priests, he does not need to offer sacrifices day after day, first for his own sins and then for the sins of the people. In other words, he doesn't have to go, oh, well, here's a sacrifice to make me clean so then I can make sacrifices for other people. He was clean. He was pure. He was blameless. So number 1, he was sinless. Number 2, he was immortal. Look down at Hebrews chapter 7, verse 23 to 24. Now there has been many of these priests since death prevented them from continuing in office. But because Jesus lives forever, he has a permanent priesthood. Do you see that? His priesthood is permanent. It goes on forever because he doesn't die. All the others died and then they got another one and then they died and they got another one and then they died. Jesus lives forever. So he's the permanent one. So we've got number 1, he's sinless. Number 2, he's immortal. Number 3, he was a human sacrifice. Look at Hebrews chapter 9 and verse 25. It says this: the high priest enters the most holy place every year with blood that is not his own. Blood that's not his own. An animal sacrifice that couldn't bear our guilt. But look at Jesus in verse 26. He has appeared once for all at the end of the ages to put away sin by the sacrifice of himself. Didn't use animal sacrifices. He used himself. So therefore, he didn't have to offer sacrifices for himself. No, he actually offered himself as a final sacrifice. And so actually there is no need for another high priest. There is no need for another mediator. There is only one priest. There is only one mediator, one man who can get us to God, who can represent us to God. We don't need any other. He is the one. And that should cause us real happiness. See, through Christ alone, through Christ dying on a cross, the once and for all sacrifice that he offers as the high priest, we can now draw near God.